why prayer feels like it isn't working. There's a quiet frustration shared by millions of sincere believers, one that rarely gets put in the Lord. Sounds like this: I pray, but nothing seems to happen. The words leave your mouth, the moments, and life continues exactly as it was before. No shift, no spice, no sense that anything truly good. Over time, the silence begins to shape how you see prayer itself. You were taught that prayer is communication, talking to God, asking, talking through cut lines with His will. Something might change. And when you go the nations, it sounds spiritual, but feel how. Maybe God said no. Maybe the Terry is alright. Maybe your faith will destroy. Maybe the answer will come later, in a way you can't see. But none of those explanations address the desperation. Because what if the problem isn't that God isn't responding? One of the problems is that prayer has been misunderstood. If you've ever felt like your prayers echo into empty space, like you're speaking without connection, without feedback, without movement, without love, that experience isn't fine, but spiritual faith. It's a sign that something essential has been missing for how prayers are taught. Modern Christianity often treats prayer as a mystery, something you do faithfully without fully understanding how or why it works. You're encouraged to keep praying, keep believing, keep waiting. But very rarely are you shown what Jesus actually did when He prayed. And that matters, because when you examine the moments in the Gospels where power moved, where healing happened, where reality shifted, where the impossible became visible, you begin to notice something unsettling. Jesus did not pray the way most people pray. He didn't plead. He didn't bargain. He didn't hope. And the clearest example of this appears just before one of His most famous miracles, standing outside the tomb of Lazarus. With death already settled and the crowd already resigned to loss, Jesus does something extraordinary. According to the Gospel, John his eyes and says, Father, thank you that you have heard me. Not will hear me, not might hear me, have heard me. He speaks in the past tense. Before Lazarus walks out, before anything changes on the outside, which raises a question most people never stop to ask. What can the prayer thanks God to answer before the event occurs? That wasn't a quest. It was a hope. That was certainty. I want to see that it can't see. Because the thing pan appears again and again. Before every miracle, before every visible shift in reality. Jesus is something that modern Christianity talks about, and even more rarely teaches. He withdraws. He goes inward. He enters a place of alignment before power flows. This isn't speculation. It's a pattern woven through the Gospels. And understanding that pattern changes everything. Not just about prayer, but about how you relate to God, to silence, and to source of power Jesus in self-excellence. What silence is not a new theology. It's not a modern invention. It's a recovery of something that was always there, spoken plainly by Jesus, preserved in Scripture, and quietly forgotten at time. And you want to listen carefully and reconsider what prayer actually is. You may discover the style you won't various things ups until. It's an open door. This is in Lazarus moving. A difficult prayer. The scene of Lazarus' tomb is often one for stone. The revelation happens before the miracle itself, before the stone is rolled away, before the command is spoken, before the dead man moves. Something far more subtle and far more important, and already take importance. Jesus stand there, surrounded by grief, doubt, and quiet accusation. Some mourn this question. A few wonder why He arrived slowly. Everything He environed His loss has already won. Time's passed. Death is settled. Hope, at least human hope, has expired. And in that moment, Jesus does not rush. He does not raise His voice. He does not plead with heaven. He does not try to convince God to act. Instead, He pauses. He lifts His eyes, and then He says something that reveals an entirely different understanding of prayer. Father, I thank you that you have heard me. That single standing exposes a depth of relationship, alignment most people never notice. Jesus is not thanking God for what is about to happen. He is thanking God for something that has already happened, something invisible, something internal, something settled before the physical world responds. The prayer is no request, is an unknown, which means the real prayer did not happen too. Whatever conversation need to take place between Jesus and the Father already occurred. Somewhere off, something earlier, away from crowd, away from the urgency, away from a noise. The public moment is not where the work was done. It is where the result becomes visible. This is where modern assumptions about prayer begin to collapse. Most people pray from the problem. Jesus prayed from alignment. By the time he rides Lazarus' tomb, there's no uncertainty left in, no hesitation, no internal debate. He's not wondering whether the Father is willing or able. He acts from a place of inner agreement that has already been established. That agreement is the key. When Jesus thanks the Father for having already heard him, he's revealing per him's truth form is now about in God's mind. It is about entering a state where God's will and your words are no longer separate. This explains why Jesus can speak with authority moments later. Lazarus come out. There's no stream in his voice, no bill, no emotional effort. The command is simple because the alignment is complete. The miracle is not powered by volume or emotion. It flows naturally from certainty. This pattern repeats throughout the Gospels. Again and again, Jesus roused the four decisive moments. He steps away from crowds. He moves into solitude. He chooses silence over urgency. The withdraws are not escapes. They are preparation. Before selecting the 12, he prays low. Before confronting opposition, he retreats. Before making turning points, he goes inward. None of this is accident. Jesus is not modeling prayer as a performance or a last minute plea. He is demonstrating a prayer as a state you enter, not a word to speak. Unless you enter the state, action becomes clear, confident, and forced. This is why Lazarus' move feels so different for humble to pray. Most prayers carry uncertainty within them. They are filled with hope, fear, doubt, desire, and effort. Or once. They ask only. They speak on gauche. They end phrases like, "If their will," because the line is not yet reached. Jesus did not use the line here, because he guess. He is not hoping the Father is. He already knows, and that nod did not come for reasoning or logic. It came for communion, something deeper than asking, deeper than talking, deeper than thinking. It came from a place where separation dissolves. That place is what Jesus constantly inviting people into, and get a time. The invitations reduce to technique of vision. The Lazarus moans thens as a quiet duke the shy deeds of prayer. He shows us that power does not emerge toward us. It emerges from you. And union is not achieved in noise. It is entered in stillness, the hidden pattern before every miracle. Once you begin to notice it, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The miracle's dues are not random interruptions or noise. They are the behavioral outcome of something that has already taken place beneath the surface. A healing is authority, is certainty. All the emerges from process that happened before the moment anyone else is watching. Jesus does not stumble into power. He does not improvise divine action. He does not react emotionally to crisis. He prepares inwardly, again and again. The Gospels quietly mention something most readers rush past. Jesus was rude. He went away. He chose solitude. He separated himself from noise, expectation, pressure, and even from people who love him. These moments are rarely explained. They always precede something significant. Before feeding crowds, he withdraws. Before confronting these leaders, he withdraws. Before faking trail, he withdraws. These not moments of rest alone, nor moments of recalibration. Or Jesus is doing in those hidden places without asking God where to next. He is not seeking information. He is not trying to persuade him. He is aligning himself so completely with the Father that when the moment arrives, action flows without resistance. This is the difference between preparation and performance. Most people try pray in the moment pressure. Jesus prays before the pressure ever rise. Our timing serve situation momenzactor. The internal work is already complete. There's no scrambling for quarry, because quarry is already been secured. This explains why Jesus can move so calmly through moments that would overwhelm anyone else. He sleeps through storms. He remains sans accusation. He responds to traps without anxiety. These are not personality traits. They are the fruit of alignment. Alignment creates stability, and stability is what allows power to move without distortion. The hidden plan for every miracle is no effort. It is stillness, not possibility, but presence. Jesus enters a state where his will is no longer competing with the Father's will. There is no internal negotiation happening, no conflict between desire and obedience. This is why Jesus can say things like, I do nothing on my own, and only I see the Father doing. Not statement of not poet owns, is the description of liberality. Jesus is so attuned, so aligned, that action becomes response rather than initiative. Modern prayer often reverses this pattern. We act first, then pray. We react, then act God to first the consequences. We speak, decide, move, and only seek confirmation. Jesus did the opposite. He lies first, then he acts. His wise words carry weight. They're not attempting to create reality. They're expressing a reality already reborn. When Jesus speaks, he is not trying to make something happen. He is allowing what has already been settled to manifest. This is also why miracles in the Gospels never feel frantic. There is no sense of spiritual strain, no buildup, no emotional escalation. The power moves quietly, decisively, almost effortlessly. That effortlessness confuses people. It leads them to believe that Jesus simply possessed power others do not. But Jesus repeatedly pushes back against that idea. He tells his followers that they will do the works he does. He invites them into the same relationship, the same alignment, the same access. What he does not do is give them a formula. Instead, he gives the formula inward and speaks about the heart, about the inner life, about secrecy, solitude, and silence. He warns against public displays of prayer that focus on being seen rather than being light. Why? Because the hidden place is where alignment is formed. The miracle does not begin where situation changes. It begins with separations, when fear, desire, thought pulling in different directions. When prayer is no longer about asking for outcomes, it becomes about inhabiting agreement. This pattern is uncomfortable for modern spirituality because it cannot be rushed. It does not reward noise. It cannot be measured by volume, repetition, or urgency. It requires patience, surrender, and trust. And most importantly, it requires stillness. Jesus does not teach stillness as a technique. He lives it as a state. And from that state, power flows naturally, without spectacle, without strain, without confusion. Once you see this pattern, prayer can no longer be reduced to word alone. It becomes way of being, a posture, a place you return to again and again until action no longer feels separate from communion. And this sets the stage for one of Jesus' most misunderstood teachings, one that directly explains how his alignment is centered. Go into your inner room, or what Jesus actually meant. When Jesus speaks, our prayers are expected, and does not give instructions of wordy, posture, volume, or length. It is not to fry a ritual to fall, or a formula to repeat, until it is direction. When you pray, go into your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father, who's unseen. A sentence has been called countless times, yet rarely explored. Most people interpret it as advice about privacy. Pray alone, don't show off. Don't make prayer phones. Without meaning your third prayer is not the full weight of what Jesus is saying. If trevity was the main point, the Tihuan, but Jews add something crucial. Your Father, who sees what is done in secret. The emphasis is not merely on isolation, but on secrecy, on something happening beneath the surface of sin, before anything is expressed out. The phrase inward evolves throughout the physical space. In the alignment, it points to an interior place, a hidden gem, a place drawn to the flow influence. Jesus is the directed attention inward, not outward. He is teaching that the deepest form of prayer does not begin with speaking, but with entering. Entering where? Not a building, not posture, not a ritual. He is pointing to space or distraction, performance, and urgency known damnues. This explains why Jesus King Sithing wars the guest prayer that multiplies words. He says that many people believe they will be heard because of how much they say, but he gently dismantles that assumption. Prayer, in his teaching, is not about convincing God through repetition. It is about becoming present to God through alignment. Words come later, if they don't need it all. The inner room is a place where the constant noise of the outer world loses its authority. It is where identity is no longer shaped by expectation, fear, or urgency. It is where the mind stops racing ahead and the heart stops negotiating outcomes. This is why Jesus connects prayer to stillness without ever using the word. Stillness is implied in the act of withdrawing inward. You cannot enter the inner room while remaining mentally scattered. You cannot close the door while continuing to rehearse arguments, plans, or anxieties. Something must quiet. Something must release control. That release is the doorway. Modern prayer often skips this step. People speak immediately, bringing their noise with them. They carry their fear, their urgency, their functions straight into prayer and wonder why peace does not fall. But Jesus teaches that prayer begins before speech. In the act of entering the inner room, this is not an escape from reality. It is a return to alignment. Inside this inner space, something subtle but profound happens. He stopped relating to God as a distant authority and begin relating from nearness. The sense of separation softens. The need to explain yourself fades. The compulsion to persuade dissolves. This is why Jesus says, "If I knows what you need, persuade you as." That statement is not meant to discourage prayer. It is meant to refrain. If God already knows, then prayer cannot be about information transfer. It must be about communion, about awareness, catching up to reality. The in-room is where awareness catches up, is where it starts competing with God's will, where resistance listens. We need to control outcomes fully, gives we trust. This is not possible humiliation. It after alignment. In alignment changes how you speak. Words finally rise from the place. They are not anxious. They are not excessive. They are not loaded with uncertainty. They are simple, grounded, and confident, because they are no longer trying to bridge a gap. There's no gap to bridge. G does not teach prayer's way reach God. It teaches prayer's way recognize that God is already present. The end room is where the recognition becomes real, not conceptually, the experientially. And once we understand this, many of Jesus's other teachings begin to make sense. His emphasis on secrecy, his comfort with silence, his refusal to afford spiritual eye for eyes, all flows from this interior orientation. The kingdom, he says, is within thee. The Father is unseen, yet knew. Prayer is hidden, yet powerful. Now the fifth motto built on noise urgency. The in-room is not dramatic. It does not feel passive, but it is where prayer stops being an effort and becomes a state of being. And from that state, clarity emerges naturally. This is not something you force. It is something you enter. How the meta was lost in modern Christianity. For Jesus' tongue of prayer so clear, so consistent, so center. Then Adele question naturally falls. High lust, to practice root of stillness secrecy, and lime becomes something dominated by noise, urgency, and performance. The answer is not found in a single moment or decision. It unfolded gradually. Is Christianity moved from fold persecute community to public institutional? Once tried in hidden rooms and quiet hearts, fully adapted to platforms, schedules, and distance, and something essential was displayed in on way. As faith began pog, prayer began audible. As gathering grew larger, silence became uncomfortable. As religion organized itself, interior practices were overshadowed by thought expressions. None of that happened with bad intentions. In my cases, were driven by sincere desire to teach, include, and unify people. But in process, prayer subtly shifted from being to doing, from alignment to arte, from presence to afforance, words multiplied, techniques emerged. Formulas were developed. People were taught what to say far more often than had it entered the inner room Jesus described. Over time, prayer became something to produce rhyme with the something high. This shit had consequences. When prayers treat primarily speech, files feels old. When prayers measure by participation, stillness feels unproductive. When spiritual life is evaluated by visible game, interior alignment becomes invisible, and therefore undervalued. Yet Jesus consistently warned against this very drift. He cautioned against praying to be seen. He challenged empty repetition. He withdrew from crowds when they tried to elevate him publicly. These were not random choices. They were protective boundaries around the heart of prayer itself. Modern Christianity often emphasizes prayer as baptism, being the course needs and desires before God. Where there is nothing inherently wrong with asking, the problem arises when asking replaces alignment, when prayer becomes a list rather than a state. In that model, silence feels like failure. Waiting feels like inactivity. Stillness feels unnecessary. And yet, silence is where alignment forms. Another factor in the loss of the method is speed. Modern life awards immediacy. We expect results quickly. We value efficiency. We measure progress by visible outcomes. But the kind of prayer Jesus practiced does not conform to those metrics. It cannot be rushed. It does not announce progress, and it often produces its deepest work before it changes hourly. That makes it difficult to teach. It is far easier to instruct people in words than words. Easier to modify presence. Easier to guide behavior than to cultivate interior stillness. And so over time, the inner room became metaphorical rather than spiritual. People learned about prayer without learning it at entry. This does not mean modern prayer is useless. Many people experience genuine comfort, guidance, and connection through spoken prayer. But something deeper has often been left unexplored. A layer of prayer Jesus assumed to little recognize, because it was already part of their spiritual alignment. When Jesus spoke about entering the inner room, he was not introducing a foreign idiom. He was pointing back to something already known to spiritual person. The practice of inward attention, quiet devotion, and conscious awareness of God's nearness. That language fed of his Christianity moved further from roots and closer to structures the power died outwork of fondy or real formation. The result is a generation of believers who pray faithfully yet feel disconnected, who speak often yet listen little, who ask sincerely yet struggle to rest in certainty, not because God is distant, but because the method of entering alignment has been obscured. Recovering it does not require abandoning spoken prayer. It requires restoring sequence. Alignment first, words of second, present before petition. This is not a critique meant to shame. It is an invitation to remember. Jesus did not complicate prayer. We did. And once that simplicity is restored, prayer starts feeling like effort and start feeling a retort. Prayer is allowing persuasion. At some point, prayer became negotiation. People learned to approach God as though they need to be convinced to act, to care, to intervene, to change circumstances that were already painfully always. Prayer took on the tone of persuasion. If I think it's the right way, if I ask long, if I prove it's the truth, go or spawn. Still way Jesus praise. The tone's completely absent. These no sounds, though he's trying to persuade the Father of. It does not argue his case. It does not persuasions. It does not intensify emotion to increase effectiveness. If prayers create different quality altogether, one of agreement rather than appeal, this difference is not subtle. It is foundational. Persuasion assumes distance. Alignment assumes unity. When prayer is treated as persuasion, God is imagined as standing wide and wide, listening, evaluating, deciding whether or not to respond. In that framework, prayer comes effortful by nature. You are reaching across the gap, hoping your words travel far enough to be heard. But Jesus does not pray across a gap. He prays from within relationship. from shared intention, from a place where separation has already dissolved. That is why his prayers feel calm, settled, and confident, even when circumstances are severe. That is what alignment looks like. Alignment does not mean you always know outcomes in events. It does not mean you control what happens. It means your awareness is no longer fighting God's will. Resistance is softened, fear has quieted, desire has been reordered. In that state, starts being rud, getting God into something, starts being allowing with our true surface. A three frames almost agree when you pray for guidance. Align does not mean answers arrive easily. It means confusion loosens his grip. When you pray for peace, alignment does not mean certainty as vash. It means turmoil no longer defines you. When you pray for change, alignment does not mean forcing outcomes. It means becoming receptive towards being shaped. Jesus models us repeatedly. It does not persuade a father to forgive. It does not persuade the finder to heal. It does not persuade the finder to act with compassion. Those things are true. Prayer, Jesus prays, is not about informing God of your needs, convincing him of their urgency. It is about becoming inwardly available to what God is already doing. This is why alignment often feels like surrender. You stop trying to manage outcomes. You stop rehearsing arguments. You stop bracing yourself against disappointment. And in that release, something opens. Alignment is not passive. It requires attentiveness. It requires honesty. It requires letting go of the internal narratives that keep you separate. Through control, entitlement, despair. These narratives are not moved through force. They loosen through presence. It also why alignment cannot be rushed. You cannot hurry surrender. You cannot force stillness. You cannot command trust to appear. Aligning unfolds as you remain present long enough for resistance to separate and suffering. This is deeply uncomfortable for modern spirituality, which often values certainty over awareness and answers all friends. Mediz does not rush people through this process. He invites them into patience, abide, this is, remain, stay. These are not instructions for protocoli. They are invitations into alignment. And once alignment forms, prayer changes naturally. You begin to speak less. You begin to listen more. You begin to sense when words are unnecessary. Your prayers become simpler, not because faith has weakened, but because trust has weakened. You no longer feel need to fling self to God or to defend your requests. You rest in the worth that you already know. This is why Jesus' most powerful prayers are often sourced. Be opened. Go. Come. There's no build-up because Alama is already dark. Prayer as persuasion tries to move God. Prayer as alignment allows God's movement to move through you. And that shift, subtle as it may seem, is where prayer stops feeling exhausting and starts feeling true. Union praying from God, not a God. At the heart of everything Jesus teaches about prayer is a shift so subtle that it is often missed entirely. It is the difference between praying to God and praying from God. One soon's difference, the other a fumzuing. Jesus consistently speaks and acts from his place of union. When he says, I and the Father are one, he is not making a philosophical statement. He is describing an experiential reality. His awareness is not divided. There's no inner separation between his will and the Father's will. Because of that, prayer is not an attempt to bridge a gap. It is an expression of shared life. This is why Jesus does not check in with God before acting. He does not pause to ask permission. He moves from a place of attunement, so deep that action becomes response rather than initiative. What the Father is doing, he's already participating in. Union changes the direction prayer. Instead of reaching outward, prayer turns inward. Instead of striding upward, awareness settles downward. Instead of speaking toward heaven, you listen from within. That does not diminish God's transcendence. It deepens your participation in his nearness. Jesus speaks of this repeatedly, though rarely in abstract terms. He talks about abiding. He talks about remaining. He talks about the vine and the branches. All of these images describe shared life, not occasional contact. A branch does not persuade the vine to send nourishment. It receives because it is already connected. This is what prayer looks like from union. You are not informing God of your needs. You are becoming aware of provision already present. You are not persuading God to act. You are aligning with action already underway. This does not mean you lose your individuality. It means your identity is no longer isolated. You are not praying as someone outside the life of God, hoping to be heard. You are praying as someone who already lives within that life. This is why Jesus can say, ask and it will be given, without turning prayer into transaction. Asking in this context is not demanding. It is participating. It is allowing awareness to open to what is already being offered. Union removes anxiety from prayer because there's no longer a fear of rejection. There's no sense of convincing, no need to perform, no pressure to get it right. You are not trying to access God. You are responding to presence. This also explains why prayer from union often feels quiet. There is less urgency because there's less separation, less striving because there's less fear, less repetition because there's more trust. Words rise only in their need, and they fall away when silence communicates more. Many people resist this idea because it feels unfamiliar. The challenge is deeply ingrained habits of prayer shaped ever expectation. Here feel threatened first, as though something essential is being moored. But what is being moored is not devotion, it is their sense. Union does not eliminate reference, it deepens it. You stop relating to God as an object of attention and begin relating from shared life. Reverence shifts from shared distance to our news. This is why Jesus speaks so naturally by the far. There's no strain in mind, no formai, no sense of hierarchy dominating relationship. The intimacy and not cattle is settled, and these invite others into the same reality. He does not reserve union for himself. He prays that his followers would know the same one as he knows, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but experientially, that they may be one as we are one. Prayer from union is not about reaching God. It is about recognizing where you already are. And once that recognition settles, prayer becomes less about asking for change and more about allowing transformation. Within you first, and into out. Jesus entered the state repeatedly. If union is the foundation of Jesus' prayer life, then an important question for our lives naturally. How will you turn to the faith again and again? Union was not something Jesus accessed once and then carried effortlessly forever. The gospel shown her to deliberately, repeatedly, and intentionally. Jews did not drift into alignment by osint. He cultivated. The most consistent detail in the prayer life of Jesus is not what he said. One word he withdrew. He chose moments when no one watching, times when there was nothing to gain socially, spiritually, or emotionally. He stepped away from affirmation and away from demand. Often, these withdrawals happened before prayer increased, before the crowds grew, he withdrew, before the opposition testified, before the weight of his mission sharpened, he withdrew. This tells us something crucial. Jesus did not wait until alignment was lost before turning stillness. He returned to prima and guarded a true state is essential, not option. The gospel described Jesus going to lone places early in morning, long for anyone else was awake. These are not moments of kui visation. They were moments of recentering. By removing himself from noise before it could shape him, Jesus ensured that his awareness remained grand and union as a reaction. This reminds most people attempt to pray after they are already warmed. They come to prayer carrying urgency, stress, and metamorphosis. Open prayer undo it already kindled. Jesus is the opposite. He enters stillness before the noise gains effort. This is why his public life flows with such clarity. He is not constantly recalibrating in front of others. He is not processing uncertainty aloud. He is not negotiating decisions in real time. The decisions have already been settled inwardly. Another overlooked aspect of Jesus' practice is duration. The Gospels occasionally mention that he spent entire nights in prayer. This does not mean he spoke for hours. It means he remained present long enough for deeper layers of resistance, fear, or distraction to surface and dissolve. Stillness takes time. The mind does not quiet instantly. The body does not release tension on command. The heart does not surrender control immediately. Jesus allowed time for this process. He did not rush himself toward clarity. He trusted that clarity would arise naturally as resistance softened. This patience is essential. Modern spirituality often treats stillness as a technique, something you try briefly and abandon if results do not appear quickly. Jesus treats stillness as a place you remain until alignment returns. He does not force outcomes. He waits for awareness to settle. Another key detail is Jesus' comfort with silence. Silence is not through him. It does not feel empty or awkward. It is not filled with words to reassure himself. Silence is not absence for Jesus. It is intimacy. It is where listening comes further. It is then the short comforts that has silence as I've experienced thy. Me to interpret silence as being or in a day, but Jesus is silence of communion. It is where the sense of separation dissolves. This helps explain why Jesus can respond so calmly in moment of crisis. His inner life has already been shaped by long familiarity with stillness. Silence is not foreign territory. It is still. Jesus also practices selective engagement. It does not respond to every demand placed upon. It does not fuel everyone immediately. It does not explain himself to every critic. These choices are not strategic. They are aligned. He moves when inner clarity gives permission. A me still is not. This is a crucial aspect union. No, not to act. Alignment produces discern. Discern protects end. And protected entity aligns presence to remain tight. Deeds is per life. Then is not compartment of is the foundation of everything else. Stillness is not something he does occasionally. It is something he returns to regularly so that everything he does flows from union rather than effort. Death is not mythical reason. It is spiritual reason. Jesus knows that without continuing to turn stillness, even the most sacred mission can drift into performance. His divine calling can become disordered by urgency if words is not aired. So he returns, again and again, not to ask for power, but to remain aligned with it. The practical entry point, stillness and silence. At this point, silence becomes unavoidable. If prayer is alignment rather than persuasion, if unity is lived rather than questioned, if Jesus repeatedly entered the state through raw thoughts, the question is no longer whether this matters. The question becomes intensely practical. And someone actually enter this place. The answer Jesus gives is not complex. It is demanding a way modern life resists. Stillness, silence, not as techniques to master, as conditions to stillness is not the absence of wound. It is the absence of inner resistance. Silence is not merely the absence of sound. It is the spectrum of commentary. The end stream explanations, evaluations, imagined outcomes, and new viewers. This is why silence feels uncomfortable to many people. When external noise stops, internal noise becomes audible. Thoughts rise, emotions surface, tension reveals itself. And rather than staying present, most people rush to fill in spacing with words, music, prayer lists, or distraction. But Jesus does not feel the silence. He remains. Stillness, in this sense, is not something new. It is something you stop doing. You stop rehearsing. You stop planning. You stop defending. You stop narrating your experience to yourself. You do not push thought away, but you also do not follow them. You let them pass without attachment. This is the threshold. At first, nothing dramatic happens. The mind wanders. The body fidgets. The urge to speak arises. This is normal. Stillness exposes how habituated we are to actos. Jesus does not treat this restlessness as a problem. He allows it to exhaust itself. Over time, if you remain, so it begins to shift. The irritability softens. The body settles. The mind flows, not because it's forced to, because no one is before, and in the settling, ors ebens, you become present not only to God, but to yourself. To the places of fear, control, and expectation, you will remain in many moving. This is where alignment begins. Stillness does not produce immediate answers. It produces space. Space for awareness to widen. Space for listening to occur. Space for union to be felt rather than theorized. This is why Jesus does not instruct people to speak first. He instructs them to enter, to close the door, to remain unseen. The entry point is not verbal. It is interior. Silent is also where prayer stops being about outcomes. When you sit in stillness without agenda, you are no longer attempting to use prayer to achieve something. You are simply being present, and present itself is transformative, not because it changes circumstances instantly, but because it changes how you inhabit them. This is deeply countercultural. Most systems teach you to approach God with intention, clear goals, articulate needs, structured requests. G invites you to approach God with availability, with openness, with willingness to remain without control in the encounter. This is why silence feels risky. There is no script, no guarantee of experience, no measurable progress, and yet this is where Jesus lived. Stillness is not withdrawal from life. It is preparation to re-enter life aligned rather than reactive. Silence is not disengagement. It is attentiveness without interference. From this place, prayer becomes less about speaking and more about recognizing, less about effort and more about consent. You consent to presence. You consent to alignment. You consent to being shaped rather than steering. Over time, words may arise, but they arise differently. You're no longer driven, I fear, or RG. They feel, fell, can't, unforced, often they're fewer than four. They are not, because prayer has diminished, is because separation is. Stillness and silence are not advanced practices reserved to minutes. They are the ordinary doorway Jesus assumes when he speaks about prayer. The fact that they feel unfamiliar says more about modern habits than about spiritual difficulty. Entering stillness does not require perfection. It requires patience. Silence does not demand emptiness. It's serenity. And when you remain long enough, the rushing without filling space, you begin to recognize something quietly perfect. You are not trying to reach God. You are allowing yourself to notice where you already are, learning to stay at the threshold. There is a moment in prayer that few people are taught to recognize. Almost everyone can't. It happens that the noise begins to fade after the urgency loosens, after the mind starts pushing kite so hard. Nothing dramatic occurs. No inside rides. No voice speaks. Instead, there's a subtle sense of almost peace, almost clarity, almost rest. This is a threshold. Most people do not stay here. The threshold feels ambiguous. It is neither effort nor resolution. It does not reward you with immediate reassurance. And because it feels unproductive, the instinct is to move past it, to speak again, to ask again, to think again, to do something. But Jesus does not rush through space. Learning to stay at the threshold is one of the most difficult and most transformative aspects of prayer. He requires resisting the impulse to finish the experience. It asks you to remain pausing the demand the outcome, explanation or fearing. The threshold, the mind begins to search for meaning. It wants a label wasabi. Is this prayer working? Am I doing this right? Should I feel something by now? These questions are not raw, but they are premature. They arise from the same habit that prayer is meant to soften, the need to control the process. Staying at the threshold means allowing uncertainty without retreat. Jesus models this posture throughout his life. He does not force clarity before it is ready. He waits. He listens. He allows timing to unfold. This patience is not indecision. It is trust. The threshold is where trust is throttled. In this space, you are no longer driven by fear, but you are also not yet anchored in certainty. It is uncomfortable because it removes the familiar supports of urgency and outcome. Yet it is precisely here that alignment deepens. Staying does not mean striving to maintain stillness. It means gently returning when attention wanders, again and again, without frustration, without self-judgment. Each return is an act of consent. Each moment of staying reinforces the recognition that you do not need the forced connection. Connection is already present. Over time, something subtle shifts. The threshold stops feeling like a pause and begins to feel like home. You become less conserved what point produces and more tuned to what reveals. You notice that clarity often emerges not as a sun enter, but as a quiet settling. Decisions feel lighter. Responses feel simpler. The internal beat fades. This is why Jesus can remain silent under pressure. Silence firm is no ways. His resonance. He lives a threshold to action of stillness in speech of sounds between heaven and earth. And for our place, he moves only when movement is wide. Way to stay at that threshold reshapes how you let say prayers are. You become floor to react. You become less empowered to assuage yourself. You become more comfortable with not knowing immediately. This does not weaken you. It steadies you. The threshold teaches you that alignment does not always announce itself. Sometimes feels like nothing at all. Nothingness. Resistance dissolves. And when resistance dissolves, union becomes tangible. Most people leave the threshold too soon because they mistake quiet for absence. Jesus shows that quiet is often the clearest sign of precious. And once you learn to stay, prayer stops being something you enter occasionally, becomes something you carry continually. You begin to recognize the threshold everywhere, in pauses and waiting in thought and moments and others used to be happy. As you are alone, continues work. And now holy shuthi, not to more who not learn to quietly and that important. Because the deeds move into God rarely help themselves with urgency. A rod way alignment always rise. Softly, steadily, without demand. Prayer, as Jesus lived it, was never meant to be exhausting. It was never meant to feel like convincing, striving, or reaching cross distance. It was meant to feel like returning to stillness, returning to presence, returning to a place where you no longer need to prove, perform, or persuade. What Jesus shows through his violence is withdraws his calm authority, is that power does not come from effort. It comes from union, and union does not begin with words. It begins when you stop long enough to notice that you are already being held. You do not have to master this. You do not have to perfect it. You do not have to feel anything special for it to be real. You only have to remain willing to return. Return to the inner room. Return to stillness when noise pulls at you. Return to silence when fear turns to rushy fold. Prayer does not end when you stop speaking. In many ways, that is where it finally begins. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is this. Nothing to heard is the doing more. It is about doing it less forcing, less grasping, less narrating every move of life to herself. Jesus did not live anxious about cause. He lived attentive to life, and from that place, everything did carry weight, clarity, and peace. Even when the path was difficult, you are not being invited to escape the world. You are being invited to inhabit it differently, from stillness rather than reaction, from awareness rather than fear, from union rather than separation. So as this moment closes, there is nothing you need to decide, nothing you need to resolve, nothing you need to apply immediately. Let what is settled remain settled. Let what is softened stay soft. And when you return to prayer, whether in words, silence, or simply wares, remember this. You are not trying to reach God. You are learning to recognize where you are. That recognition is enough.